Great, great, thank you. Everyone, it's kamsahamnida, annyeonghaseyo. That's all I know. It's so nice to be here today. My name is Lindsay Davis. I live in Singapore, where I founded Femtech Association Asia, which I'll tell you a little about in a bit. Now, I know we said on the agenda that I'd be talking about the global market, but I'm actually way more excited about what's happening in Asia. I'm more excited about the innovation. I'm more excited about the consumers. I'm more excited about the advancements that we've made and the acceleration of the industry. So I'm really looking forward to talking with you today, and a special thank you to Vespex and also Tech for hosting us here. Thank you so much for having us. So how many of you are familiar with the term Femtech? We have one person, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, how exciting. So obviously in this room, we're here for a reason. And it's probably because we're familiar with female technology. When we look across Southeast Asia in particular, we know that only 1 in 4 women consumers are familiar with the term. So looking forward, we want to say, what is Femtech? So for today, let's all get on the same page. When we're talking about Femtech, we're talking about software, diagnostics, devices, things like menstrual tracking apps, hormonal health wearables, all of these things that you're very, very familiar with. However, we don't want to think of women's health as strictly what my friend Rachel here in the front calls bikini medicine, covering here and here. We want to talk about something broader. We want to talk about what is exclusively for women's health, disproportionately in women's health. For instance, 80% of autoimmune diseases actually impact women, or differently impact women's health. An example of that would be cardiovascular disease, which often when we hear of cardio or heart attacks, we think, oh, my left arm hurts. That's what's happening, I'm having a heart attack. But actually for women, kind of feels a lot like just being a woman. A lot of anxiety, it feels like stress, a racing heartbeat. I don't know about you, but that feels like my everyday. So apparently I have a heart attack constantly. So the vision really for women's health that I see and that we carry across our organization, and hopefully that we all share here, is a vision for available, accessible, and affordable healthcare for all women, specifically in Asia, which is my focus and what I care the most about, selfishly, because I'm based here. So it's good to be in this room with all of us sharing that core focus today. So Femtech Association Asia, what do we do? So we launched in October of 2021. We've been around for about 5 years. We currently represent startups and advocacy groups in 10 different countries. Most recently, we launched in Bhutan in November of 2024. I've spent some time there working, so was able to meet some great contacts. We have over 160 members in our network, and we actually have over 80 startups, which I put here, but the reality is we're closer to 100 now, which is really, really exciting. This certainly doesn't represent the entire Femtech landscape in Asia, which I'll get into in a minute, but it certainly shows that our organization has that reach and is able to connect founders like Scarlett at Vespex and Helen at Vespex across our entire region and hopefully beyond. What do we do? What do I spend my time doing other than holding microphones in front of rooms of amazingly intelligent people? Thought leadership. So we do a lot of research because I think we know that women's health is under-researched, underserved, and underfunded. So we do start with thought leadership and how we actually are looking at our consumers here in Asia. Secondly, we do a lot of programming and events. What a great example here today. Amplification, we work with the media to talk about the founders, to talk about the startups. An example of that would be working with Vespex and Beauty Matter, the online digital magazine, to actually talk about what's happening in Korea, South Korea's Femtech space to a global audience, which is really important to us because we really want to promote Asia as the next big region. And finally, community building. So helping connect investors, founders, ecosystem builders, even just enthusiasts, those who really want to see women's health progress. So why does this matter? There is a huge investment gap. So first of all, I'd like to recognize Dominique Kratzos from Amboy Street Ventures for letting me steal her slide from when we were in Shanghai last week. I think this gives a really good example of the fact that total funding in healthcare worldwide is about 2.87 trillion, so a massive market. But this number is a lot smaller when we look at women's health. And especially when we look at women's specific categories outside of cancer. Cancer does tend to get more funding, a lot of women's breast cancer, et cetera, but still not enough. The reality is, if we invest more, we now know that for every dollar invested, we can see $3 coming back. So when we look at Femtech, it's not just about impact, it's actually about the economics. And so we'll talk a little bit about that for our region today. We talk about the fact that Asia is home to more than 60% of the world's population and some of the fastest growing healthcare and digital ecosystems globally, yet we really are underserved as consumers here. There aren't enough Femtech solutions yet, and that's global, that's not just specific to Asia. Women spend significantly more years in poor health, on average about 3 years at a minimum, so we can just see longer lives, but in poorer health, not ideal. Historically, women's health has been underfunded and under-researched. We actually weren't included in a lot of health studies until about 1993. So this is fairly recently that women were really not thought of as just small men. We really see a difference there. And for anyone who's interested in this topic, I recommend a book called Invisible Women that has a lot of great overviews around the gender health equity gap and broader gender health equity in data. We do see that demographic shifts are accelerating a lot of our work in Femtech. What do we talk about in South Korea a lot? The birth rate, right? We talk a lot about the lowest birth rate in the world. So Femtech is now a part of that discussion in women's health. What else do we talk about in Asia overall? Aging populations, less babies, and fantastic, older generations that are still contributing amazingly to society. So how are we supporting women in their years? I'm midlife now. So how are we helping support women like me who are still making impact, still thriving, to make sure we continue to have our health? We have seen, so I'm thinking here, I didn't change my last slide, I'm sorry. This is what I was talking about. So ultimately looking at the fact that investing in women's health is just smart economics. And furthermore, when we look at the actual consumer and who's holding the pocketbooks in the house, it's often women. I laugh that 80% of women are healthcare decision makers, and I even look to my husband, who I don't think he's ever made a dentist appointment. I make them. And this man is very capable. So case in point is my own husband in my own home. So we do see investor success stories, and I'm going to share a few of those in Asia as well, which I think is really nice to see what's happening in our region. Again, I love Asia, I love being here, this is where I focus. So we've seen a number of exits. We've seen proof of IPO to acquisition ratios. We've seen the movement of high acquisition values and onward growth. Even last week in China, we were talking about Daima, basically the world's first period tracking app and China's first Femtech unicorn. So they're here, they're in Asia. We just aren't getting amplified enough. And that's the goal in a lot of what we try to do through Femtech Association Asia. So we see, sorry, this is a bit blurry, apologies. But we do see these global success stories from companies around the world. Earlier I talked about exclusively for women, disproportionately impact women, and differently impact women. These are all examples of companies, and I'm happy to share this if anyone wants to see this particular element, and it's also in the WAM as a reference down below. But if anyone would like to talk more about this, I'm happy to walk through it. One thing that I think we've seen as a really interesting case study is Aura, on the far right here. I'm not sure if you've seen that they've done a lot of work in women's health, and they've actually built specific AI for women's health. And one of the things they looked at was making sure that their solution was not dismissive and was empathetic. How interesting, right? That it wasn't just about the hard facts, it's how we actually talk with our consumers, even through digital applications. So what about Asia? We have actually seen momentum. We've seen very good momentum. Now, these are all examples of, in Southeast Asia in particular, whether it's Ease Healthcare looking at sexual health, which has now expanded dramatically into holistic women's health, Zora Health, which is in the fertility space. And she's an interesting story, Anna. She's a phenomenal founder. This is her second company. She's already exited one. She met with over 110 VCs. Didn't get funding, so went to angel investors. So that's one of the things we'll talk about today is the funding gap, that we're seeing a real lack of VC investment at this stage, worldwide and in Asia in particular. As far as success stories go, We do see Kindred Health, which is a high mover in the hybrid clinic space. So they specifically are running women's health clinic, offline and online. They've expanded rapidly across the Philippines, and they're really one to watch. So those are just a few examples of where we have seen good funding coming through. Not all from VC, but at least the funding is on the move. So regional industry development, this is a bit of a busy slide. But basically, we really saw Femtech in Asia begin in around 2006 with INX Innovate. Some people will say, oh, well, what about this company or that company? But overall, this is a pretty fair starting point. We saw a lot of market validation between, look at that big gap there, about 10 years. This is really where we saw more market validation with AI-led companies like Hikura, which actually uses AI to find the right place on the epidural for just one time in for babies or surgery. And then Biorhythm, which is a medical device specifically for pregnant women. This one I love because, again, I'm selfish. And I love what I work on every day. So we launched Femtech Association Asia. So the idea is that we've seen some movement here. Now we've really started to emerge very rapidly. Literally within a year, we saw the number of Femtech startups grow, I mean, an insane amount. When we first started, we were about 30 to 40 companies, and it's just really soared in this past 5 years, and we get more and more reaching out every day to join the association, which is really fun. So Kindred, I mentioned, raised the money in the Philippines. An acceleration, we saw the first women's health accelerator in Southeast Asia, the AI for Health, out of the Philippines with Vilgro Philippines. Our first industry conference that we saw in 2024, and now we have another one here in 2026 with the Vespex team hosting us. Thank you so much. And then finally, we saw our first Femtech-specific fund, and that was with UNICEF Femtech Ventures, which Temasek Foundation out of Singapore also contributed to. So we've seen a lot of movement in especially the last 5 years. And there's a lot more that's happened in this time, but I just think it's nice to have a starting point. Let's talk money. Let's talk money. So when we look at the numbers in Southeast Asia in particular, because this is where we've actually run the numbers in detail, we see the approximate consumer spending on Femtech in Southeast Asia is valued at about $6 billion US. There's so much room for growth there. And given the size of the untapped markets in Asia, it's really exciting to think of how much more we can do. When we look at how we compare here in Asia with global Femtech startups, we can see the US is huge. I'm originally from the US, I'm also British. See how big the US is? It's my size, right? Nice and tall. So as we move forward, you can see that Asia is still growing. South Korea in particular, big competitor and lots of growth. So we get really excited to see what's happening here. How do we compare across Asia? Which markets are growing? Which ones are the largest? China is leading right now. Japan also very well established with a lot of support from the government. We see Singapore and South Korea right next in line. I'm going to skip past here in the interest of time and talk a little bit about key challenges. We talked about funding. When we talk about awareness and stigma, we still obviously have a lot to do in the market to have the conversations. We also have a lot to do with discussing social media censorship. The fact that certain words aren't allowed online. Words that are just our body parts are not allowed to be used online or get shadow banned or canceled. So how do we actually have the discussion around women's health if we can't use some of the words? And then finally, ecosystem support. There is a gap for helping support more founders and funders, is what I'd like to say. So how do we overcome this? We look at stronger research, stronger data availability. We look at increased awareness, having events like this that we're talking very openly about women's health. We look at building ecosystems like Femtech Association Asia, or hope to be Femtech South Korea soon. We promote gender equality in investments. We scale up innovative funding and financing. A lot of it is which we see is coming from public-private partnerships. And finally, of course, we need to see the integration of Femtech in government strategies, which we have absolutely seen here in South Korea. So let's talk about South Korea, my favorite country. I know, right? Give me all the food. Give me all of your food. All of it. I want all of your food. So first of all, Beauty Matter quoted that in 2024, South Korea's Femtech market was worth about $478 million. I think it's actually worth a lot more than that. And let me give you an example of why. We look at the menopause market alone, which other people have said, here, other companies, research firms, have said is worth 400 million. There's no way that the whole femtech market is only worth 78 million. So there's a lot of growth here, and I think South Korea is just scratching the surface of its greatness. I want to give Vespex credit for pulling together the first ever market map of South Korea. Super exciting. We can see that we really do work across all categories, but it's still a small number. 22 companies. There is so much opportunity for founders to come in. Of course, make impact. That's what we want. But I also like to say, make money. Make impact and make money. That's the goal. We're growing businesses, not just making impact. Oops, sorry about that. So I want to talk for a minute about this wonderful quote from Scarlett that I read in an article about K-beauty. So although I'm very disappointed that my wrinkles are still here, I am excited that Femtech is also moving up, so hopefully my health will improve. So basically, when we look at, as Scarlett shared, the K-beauty playbook, which transformed daily habits into a massive export market through systemic routines and prevention, is exactly the blueprint we are digitizing for Femtech. So what is that blueprint? What are we talking about when we're talking about the blueprint? We're talking about prevention. So rather than prevention, my wrinkles, we are talking about preventative health. How are we making sure we are healthier for longer? We're talking about consumer trust. Which brands do we buy? We buy those that we have faith in, that we really trust. Similarly, in our healthcare, we want trusted digital care. Scientific rigor. I love everything that has the labels and it's, proven to work and 95% of women see a reduction in this or that. I love that. Even more importantly is in our healthcare. We want to make sure that the solutions we're using are valid, are proven, have clinical trials. That validation is incredibly important across both industries. Exporting systems. South Korea is such an amazing brand. Actually, Rachel and I were talking about this morning at a pharmacy, and I said, how amazing to have your country be a brand that you can be so proud of that people see made in South Korea and they pick it up and say, yeah, I'll buy it. No problem at all. I mean, that's incredible, the brand you guys have built. So when I think about exporting from South Korea, you already have so much market trust worldwide. This is a loved country. And then finally, global branding. When we talk about, obviously, a lot of K-beauty is global branding, global women's health brands are going to be similar. We are going to look for brands we can trust, as I just mentioned, and I think that's a big part of it. So let's talk market validation. We've seen many companies, by the way, in South Korea. These aren't the only three. I'm just using these as examples of 3 companies, which I actually bought this product today, so congratulations to Happy Moon Day. We've seen funding. We've seen 30% of Korean women in their 20s are registered, with this organization, lots of downloads. Chungmed, fascinating, and such a massive change, right? HPV affects many, many women. I think it's something like 80% of women, and don't quote me on that exact fact, but it's something quite high. 90% of women, thank you, Rachel, who we'll hear from in just a little bit. The fact that this is the world's first device out of South Korea, again, for HPV infection treatment, sterilization equipment. So look at a B2C and a B2B move. This product has room to grow. And then finally, we look at Vespex, who we all love. There we go, right? See, local, I'm a local. So we see absolutely that this is really pioneering. It's, relational healthcare, hormone diagnostics, cycle tracking, information, over 750 users, AI-driven, which, by the way, all investors are saying right now in the Femtech space. We found in Southeast Asia, any company in Southeast Asia that's looking to raise money, the first question from the VCs is, but do you have AI? Which, by the way, is a tool, not a solution, so we're working on how we communicate that. Let me run back over here. My time is up. So I'll go through the last 2 slides very quickly. So I just wanted to say that South Korea has a lot to be proud of. And I think in particular, something that is a strength of South Korea is the government involvement in startups and in Femtech in particular, and in women's entrepreneurship. And I have a number of programs that I was researching. I'm so sorry. there we go. I have a number of programs that I've been researching, but I have 3 quick examples that I won't go into detail on. But the first one is government is definitely here based on the second basic plan to promote women's-owned businesses and activities. Absolutely fantastic. It's not just funding, but it's actually collaboration and building policies that actually work for women. Because as women entrepreneurs, we need more support in every way, given where we are and equality in the healthcare space, equality in the fundraising space. Secondly, we see the KWEN Femtech Industry Fostering Program. There were over 298 applicants for this program. Isn't that amazing? And they're supporting at least the 25 with clinical trials, demos, fundraising, marketing, global experiences, trade missions, really committing to growing these femtech companies. And then finally, overall, again, my love for South Korea, a lot of what we're doing here in Seoul as well. I love that there are all these communities developing that are all about making South Korea the premier destination for founders to start their companies. That is really something to celebrate. K-Deep Tech Town, which I was like, that's amazing. Deep Tech and Femtech looking at AI and biotech-driven startups as priorities. And then global accelerator programs. How are we bringing that South Korea brand abroad? So these are all things I'm super excited about. Again, you can tell I'm a big fan of the country, big fan of everything that has to do with Korea. And we have a lot of work to do in the femtech space. Having said that, I think this is a market that can lead the space in Asia and really beyond with global exports. So all in all, thank you for having me today. I know I could keep talking in 20 minutes. Who knew? My husband knew that would be too much time to give me a microphone. But for you guys, you didn't know that yet. So I'm happy to chat if anyone wants to talk about more of Asia after this, other countries in Asia after this. But let's start with what we can do. So a lot of us are founders. So let's keep growing our businesses. That's an obvious one, right? As a founder, let's connect. Let's connect with the Femtech Association Asia. Let's connect with Vespex. Let's connect with other ecosystems around the world. The second thing we can do is if we aren't a founder, let's think about how we can support Korea's Femtech founders and startups. Do we work in media? Can we help them get coverage? Do we work at a corporate that we can bring women's health into the programming in our office and actually have these discussions and workshops? And finally, let's use our voices. I have found that the LinkedIn posts that gain the most likes are those that are very authentic, talking about the exciting parts of women's health and also the challenges of women's health. So I don't think we need to be afraid to talk about women's health. And as I look around this room, I'm especially excited to see so many male allies in the room because your voices also matter incredibly. So I guess in conclusion, finally, I'm almost done, everyone, don't worry. I know Scarlett's like, wrap it up. All in all, Korea Femtech Summit being here today all together is incredibly important, and it really is a part of something bigger than just those of us in this room. This is really the start of building the voice for South Korea's Femtech movement, not just industry, but the movement for women's health worldwide. Everyone is looking for you guys to succeed. So you have the support of the global industry, the Femtech industry, of course the Femtech Association Asia. And really, if K-Beauty changed how the world thinks about beauty, K-Femtech can really change how the world experiences women's health and how we experience women's health here in Southeast Asia. So I'll stop talking now. I'm 6 minutes over. I'd like to apologize for already making you late. Soju on me after the event. And thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on your first event here, you guys. Thank you. Thank you.